Once again, I subjected myself to the task of playing a game, in this case Jedi Survivor, for 100 hours so that I could review it properly. Well, kinda. See, this game is not the type you would spend 100 hours on, so I played both Jedi Fallen Order for 40 hours, mainly because I didn't remember anything about its story, and Jedi Survivor for about 60, so that I could accurately review it while comparing both. Now, is the game good? In all honesty, I think it's the best Star Wars video game I have ever played. However, just because I think it's one of the best Star Wars games so far, I won't go easy on its failures, particularly the launch. If I could describe it in 3 words, it would be... As soon as Jedi Survivor came out, the Steam reviews were bombed with poor and negative reviews of the game, from people who couldn't play it because it kept crashing, to people who had the highest NPCs who could run it, at 20 FPS. I fall on the latter end of the spectrum. Although I do not have the most expensive, highest quality, craziest gamer PC, it is pretty good and worth a couple of grand. But I was one of the lucky ones. Throughout most of the game, my PC ran it at around 45 to 60 FPS, except in the planet Kobo, in which the performance just tanks so incredibly low, I can't help but think of this planet as one of the most frustrating experiences human beings can experience, apart from having a naggy ex-wife. All of this becomes a lot less surprising when you realize that the publisher of this game is none other than EA. Yep, none other than the wonder child of fuck-ups of the gaming industry. For all people who might defend the bad launch of the game, I'm sorry, but there's no excuse for it. If you go to a restaurant and order, let's say a hamburger, it's supposed to have your usual lettuce, cheese, tomato, and meat, but instead you get delivered a hamburger missing the actual meat. You'd be upset, right? Well, the case is the same for this game. You purchased it, you come home with the expectation that it will run properly because, well, why wouldn't it? You paid $60 for it and it's been released to the public and then it just doesn't run. At least not as advertised. It's a spit in the face of the consumer and it worsens the reputation of everyone involved, from the developer Respawn Entertainment to the main actor Cameron Monaghan. It's very simple. If it's not ready, delay it. It's very hard to recover from a bad launch, and the prime example of this is Cyberpunk 2077. Although the game is much better now, it will always be known as the game that overpromised and underdelivered. Not to mention that it was followed by Tears of the Kingdom, which makes Jedi Survivor look a lot worse in comparison. It's not even close. The good news is that they have released a few patches which have improved the performance of the game. However, you will still run into some stuttering issues. At least on PC you will. But enough ranting, let's get to the gameplay. Putting the bad launch aside, this game is a masterpiece. If you thought that Fallen Order was good, then prepare yourself for a worthy sequel. Jedi Survivor really just said, you know everything we did last game? We're gonna crank it up big time, and they did. The movement is much more fluid, allowing for double jumps, dashes, and grappling, making the character feel lighter than on Fallen Order, and you can even mount wildlife too. You have some of the most incredible traversal sections I've ever seen in a video game. For example, the moment Cal Kestis and Marin combine their powers in order to elude a huge machine. Take a look at this.
I can't believe this! Believe it! Well done!
It looks insane, but it plays even better. This is actual gameplay. None of this is a cutscene, and I'm all for it. When I witness moments like these, it makes me so happy. Honest to God it does. I'm a person that loves retro gaming, from indie games that try to bring back that classic platformer vibe with contemporary fluid controls, to actual old school PlayStation 1 video games like Metal Gear Solid and Spyro the Dragon, amongst many others of its time. And now to be able to sit here and having witnessed the technological improvements of the last 3 decades in the video game environment is truly a privileged position. Now let's talk difficulty. Like Fallen Order before, you can choose the difficulty you play in. There are 5 difficulties, from easiest to hardest, and this is their order. You've got Story Mode, Jedi Padawan, Jedi Knight, Jedi Master, and Jedi Grandmaster. Because I ain't no bitch, I play in the hardest difficulty, and, respectfully, I got my ass whooped. But that's because I'm used to playing Souls games, and I'm a bit of a masochist. Do I like that the game has difficulty settings? Not really, but I understand why it does. Star Wars, unlike the Souls franchise, at least originally, has a huge number of fans. These range from little kids to grown-ass men, so it's logical that for a 7-year-old child that wants to play the game, that they would not be suited for the last 2 difficulty settings. Don't get me wrong, he's a bitch-ass kid, but we move. All jokes aside, I think it's understandable and it ends up catering the game for several age groups, and to people that acquire their satisfaction from a video game from its story rather than from its difficulty. Now, I really loved playing the hardest difficulty, it just made me feel like my skill actually mattered, since both the parry timing was decreased and the damage caused to me was increased. The funny thing is that fighting against other Jedi-like enemies always felt easier than, for example, this fucking thing. How did it go? Well, take a look. Please subscribe. I suffered a lot with this video. Thank you. This guy had me rethinking my life choices. I lost count of the number of times I died to it, but rest assured, I have video recordings dedicated just to defeating him. I got to a point where I paused the game and thought about going to an easier difficulty, but then my mind stepped in and asked me, "Are you a bitch?" And I said, "Nah," so I beat his Ogdo Bogdo ass and all that for a pink poncho. Improving on the previous game, they came out with 3 additional stances, and in total you have the single blade, the classic one, double bladed, just like the one used by Darth Maul, dual wield, self-explanatory really, blaster like the single bladed but with an additional pistol for long range attacks, and crossguard like the style of Kylo Ren. In my playthrough, I stuck to my usual ones, which were the single blade and double bladed. I like the inclusion of the other ones, but it just doesn't feel like it fit my style of play. I gave dual wield the bigger chance, but the damage output just didn't do it for me. Crossguard was a bit too slow, even though its damage was quite high. And lastly, the blaster stance is just not my style. I feel like it's not really what a Jedi would use, so I kinda refrained from using it myself. The skill tree became significantly bigger, covering all of the stances available in the game, and like before, including the Force skill tree and the Survival skill tree. I found it quite easy to max out my skills in both the stances I used throughout most of the game and the Force and Survival skills. Any others, I didn't really bother. The impact it has on gameplay is substantial, especially if you know your way around the controls. I found that playing both games back to back made me realize how much the varied use of certain moves you acquire, compounded with the use of force-based skills, aid you significantly when taking down stronger foes. Another improvement from Fallen Order that just makes the gameplay much more fluid. Other than that, I don't have much more to say on the skills tree, since it doesn't really change the formula in any particular way, and it's quite standardized. The great thing that this game does, and helps from a narrative standpoint, is that all skills learned in the previous game are instantly known by Cal in Jedi Survivor. You still do have a refresher of the controls as soon as you jump into Jedi Survivor. It would make no sense not to have it, since new players could buy this one game first and be completely left in the dark without these tutorials. However, regardless of it being a small touch, it's still better than making the players have to sit through an artificially made narrative-based obstacle just so that they have to relearn skills that the character already knew, especially considering that Cal Kestis had to do this in the first game since he had not used the Force since he was a child. Some people might have missed this if they do not explore Grease's bar that much. On the top floor there's a corner in which you are able to play Holo Tactics. Holo Tactics is basically a game in which you have to carefully choose your troops to fight your opponent's troops, and whoever eliminates the opposing team first wins. In order to obtain more troops, you need to have BD1 scan everyone you come across in the actual game so that they become usable in Holo Tactics. It's a neat little game that is actually quite challenging. Moons and asteroids included, this game has 6 locations. These are Coruscant, Kobo, Jeddah, Tanalorr, Shattered Moon, and Nova Garon. Each of them are completely different from the last. From different wildlife to flora and just overall scenery, you can see the stark difference in the color palette from one planet to the other, making each of them unique and memorable. Kinda like your mom. The biggest difference between how each planet plays out in Jedi Survivor in comparison to Fallen Order is that in the new title, most planets feel quite open as opposed to very linear like Fallen Order. Even though Jedi Survivor is not an open world game, it feels like an open zone game. Let me explain. It's like comparing Dark Souls 1 to Dark Souls 3. Don't crucify me for this, but I've always felt like Dark Souls 1 was a much more linear experience than Dark Souls 3. Both titles have a very well connected world, but it just feels like the Dark Souls 3 had more expansive areas than that of Dark Souls 1. Jedi Survivor does the same thing. Rather than making an open world game, they made it so that it feels like you're exploring a particular area of a planet by making it wider and encouraging exploration by placing landmarks and new routes that didn't lead you to where your quest was located at. These areas might have become more important later on in the story, making you revisit them, but you are still welcome to explore them unless you are missing any particular skills necessary to do so. I don't want to spoil anything in regards to the story, so I'll keep it short and sweet. Like my p. Both games have good stories, but the good thing about playing one title after the other was that it allowed me to form a bigger connection with the characters, even ones that I didn't initially feel particularly strongly about, like Seer. In this new installment, you get to see old friends and meet new ones. The best part of it all is that every character is very fleshed out, even if your interaction is short-lived. After BD1, my favorite character is probably Turgle. He's just a lovable idiot, and who doesn't love one of those? After all, my girlfriend certainly loves me. I think. Moving on, the characters are really well written, and their personalities do feel really well crafted by the writers of the story. In this entry, the relationships between the characters we had been already introduced to flourish, and the characters that are new blossom. From the heroes to the villains, most characters feel really memorable, and I do have to say that I loved every single boss fight I had. They were very unique and pushed the boundaries of what they had done in the past to a new level, whether it was a unique boss mechanics or just changing the environment while having one. In Fallen Order, you could customize both BD1, your lightsaber, the mantis, and your outfit. In Jedi Survivor, you can do all of that, plus customize Cal completely. Except for the mantis, they took that one out, I don't know why, but they did. You can make Cal go from Obi-Wan Kenobi to good old Alabama hillbilly that brews moonshine in his bathtub. Not only that, but the things you could already customize have now been expanded upon, and we've been given way more liberty as the player in order to do so. The music is once again fantastic. It manages to build a beautiful soundscape of each and every planet, situation, and especially conflict that you come to find. On another note, I love how Star Wars as a franchise has managed to build a sci-fi world that has used common and classical instruments as the core of its soundtrack. Many other sci-fi tales, whether they are a movie, a series, or a video game, tend to lean on synthesizers and in general electronic music production to reinforce its science fiction traits. In comparison, it's funny to see how such an established franchise has been able to build its monumental success without having to resort to such means. They might use it here and there, but it's definitely not the foundation of its musical footprint. The downsides in this game are few and far between. They are either technical issues or just overall issues in guidance throughout the levels, yet every so often there would be a physics issue either with cloth that is attached to Cal's outfit or even his hair. Direction-wise, there were times where the design of a particular area would just be slightly too confusing and not particularly straightforward, causing the momentum of particular moments of the story to come to a halt due to confusing design. And lastly, the map. The map in comparison to the last game was a bit of a downgrade. In their attempt to simplify the map, they actually made it more confusing because in the last title you could see the difference in the terrain and recognize landmarks when bringing them up, while in the new one, everything is more simplified, and since the maps are bigger, it's more difficult to actually remember where to go or where you came from. Other than that, thank you very much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed. Feel free to support the channel if you want to see more of my content, and I'll see you guys next time.